Alright, I cruelly teased this in a video I did on my K-Bar Combat Kukri, where I opened a box and then wouldn't show you what was in it. Also refer back to the recent videos I've done on sub-hilt knives by Cold Steel, the OSS, the Black Bear Classic, the OSI, and my promise to do, well, the most thorough deep dive I can do into the effectiveness of the sub-hilt design. And in those videos I've asked for, well, any recommendations you might have on any, well, reasonably affordable sub-hilt knives on the market. And right now there doesn't seem to be a lot of them, or at least not a lot I'm willing to take a chance on. One maker that has a couple of models out there that I've been reluctant to pull the trigger on for, well, a long time is Hibben. Now, with some careful thought and a little bit of research and recommendations, there are some YouTubers out there that I really respect that love their Hibben knives. I decided I was going to go ahead and spend about 80 bucks on this thing. The Hibben Assault. Now, I have not opened this yet. Just broke the tape on the box. So you're seeing the first time I'm laying hands on it. What do I get in the box? Well, with a little silica do not eat packet, I've got a reasonable leather sheath with Hibben markings on it. So that's pretty cool. It's kind of stiff, well waxed. We'll see how that holds up here. But let's take a look at the knife. Yep, we've got a certificate. So there's that for authenticity's sake. And then in more plastic, an old cardboard blade protector sheath, we have, ooh, okay. So I'll get you some specs on this in a second here. This is a 7.5-inch blade. It's about the size of my K-Bar USMC, which is one of the reasons I got it. It is a single-edged knife. It does have a false edge that is not sharp with a clip point. It is 7CR17 steel. Now, one of the things that made me a little reluctant to buy certain Hibben knives is some of them are in 3CR13 or 5CR15, which is, well, potentially resilient or potentially, well, not very edge holding. 7CR17 is not an expensive steel, but it's usually one that can get the job done, and we'll definitely see how that works in as I see how this knife functions. Can it cut paper out of the box? Well, first I need a piece of paper, and the answer is, well, yeah, pretty well. Feels reasonably good in the hand. Some of the edges on the front are a bit chiseled. Same thing with the sub-hilt. But let me get some specs for you, and I'll handle it for a bit, see how it feels, see how it operates, and to be continued. All right, transparency, that was not the factory edge that you just saw do those cuts. I did do just a little fine stoning and stropping. Didn't take very much to get a pretty keen edge on this thing. And while I was at it, I mentioned my concern with the 7CR17 steel, which is used on a lot of functional but cheap knives, not terribly expensive knives. My equipment, Stone Steel's files, is saying it's running at least 56 Rockwell, maybe as high as 58. It's got a pretty solid, sharpenable edge on it, and we'll see how it holds up over time. Now, here we are the next morning. So I've spent a couple hours with this thing. Let me give you some specs, and my initial impressions. Now, I did kind of compare the blade shape and length to Micarta, and it is half an inch longer than that, but the knife I'm going to go back and forth comparing it to most is going to be the Cold Steel Black Bear Classic, and that may kind of be an unfair comparison, but I think there's some important things to bring up here. In terms of similarity in design, construction, and then some major glaring differences, and let's start with the most obvious one, price. $80 is what I got this from. There's a lot of places you could pick this up right now. Amazon, Chicago Knife Works, a lot of places have this knife at a pretty reasonable price. $10 more than I paid for the OSS and the OSI, basically. So, good deal for a knife that has stainless steel hilt, sub-hilt, and micarta scales, pin construction, and we'll talk about the full tang. $250 on sale. So basically, you could get 3 of these for the price of 1 of these on sale. Sometimes they go for a lot more than $250. So the question is going to be: is basically the Black Bear really worth 3 times more than this thing? And the answer is, in quality and steel, I think yes. There's some things about, obviously, the differences between the steels, being a fairly inexpensive common stainless steel versus the VG San Mai construction of this knife, and just the general fit and finish overall, especially when you come to the hilt, where I've handled this thing for a couple weeks now. The only spot on this knife that says flaw to me, on one side of the sub-hilt, I don't even know if you can see it, it's just a little raised over the scale. Just a little bit. It's rounded, it's smooth, but it's enough of a bump that I notice it. But that is the one flaw on this knife. Well, what about the good and bad of the Hibben? Because that's what we're talking about. All right. So basic specs: 7.5-inch blade. You're talking 15 ounces overall weight. The Black Bear is 16, so an ounce heavier. Now, the OSS and the OSI are 9 and 10 ounces respectively, so definitely a lot lighter, and a lot of that's the the craton grip and the lack of solid guard and sub-hilt. But 3/16 of an inch thick. One concern I've got with it is the hollow grind is it's very hollow. It's very hollowed out, which means on my calipers there is a 1/16 of an edge or less of steel behind that edge, up to a little bit more of an 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So there's not a lot of steel behind that edge for quite a while, so I don't know if that's going to make it fragile. There are also issues I've had cutting through resistant materials with hollow ground edges. Let me see if I can kind of demonstrate that here with something like cardboard, and it cut through after honing, and it cut through the cardboard just fine. But one of the things I've noticed that makes me struggle with a hollow ground edge is it tends to slide in pretty well depending on that secondary bevel. I will get some resistance in binding material like cardboard and wood that kind of grip to the side of the blade as it goes up that curve. But then once it's past that, and once the side planes, the crest of that grind have made it in there, there's actually technically less steel in contact with the surface of the thing you're cutting through. So after that, it should cut, and it does cut, pretty well. Not the best that I've got, but let's say better than I thought it would. So again, a knife that's got a lot of potential. Other flaw-ish things. I feel a lump on the clip point swedge here. There's something uneven in the shape of it. You can't really see it, but I definitely want to run my finger along there. There's a bump in the middle of it. But where I'm finding the most flaws, and a whole lot less than I thought I'd find, is in the handle construction. Now, everything seems to be tight. There are no obvious glaring seams with those micarta scales. And the back strap, the way they've kind of rounded everything here, this side is really smooth. Flawlessly so. The other side, though, you can see, well, you'll notice that there are some sharp 45-degree angular bevels on all of the forward edges. It's a little bit weird to me because, well, everything on the Black Bear is all nice and smooth. But it's a little odd of a choice, and it is in certain ways uncomfortable. We'll talk about that in handling here in a second. Also, that secondary finger groove, we'll talk about that in a second too. But there is significant unevenness in the way these two bevels are ground on either side. They're very, well, inconsistent in depth and angle and things like that. So that leads to some really interesting, weird, unbalanced corners here, and especially around the hilt and sub-hilt. And there is a glaring point where I'm finding a couple of corners here that are kind of biting my fingers just a little bit because the micarta and the steel edges aren't lining up very well. But that is correctable. We'll talk about that term as well here in a second. But otherwise, point of balance is, well, pretty much the same as the Black Bear. It's right between the two guards. So handling is quite nice. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about the sheath really quick before we get into that handling section now. It's leather. It's solid. I'm not terribly crazy about a couple of things. It is kind of stiff, but I expect it'll break in a little bit. But the way it fits the knife, you'll notice obviously that the guard, there's an angle to it, right? You see that? It's not straight across the blade. It's angled. There is, well, this flap is kind of annoying. We'll talk about that in a second. There's an angle cut in the top of the scabbard mouth, right? Okay, but they don't line up. They don't match. So when I put the knife in, I get this, and it just doesn't seem like this scabbard is made for this knife. So, the other thing about this is I've kind of gotten spoiled by the Cold Steel, and I've complained certain things about their Secure X sheaths, but their Secure X sheaths, their major advantage is, well, not only are they secure, but you can modify how you wear them, how you carry them, how you mount them. Yeah, this is just, you got the one choice. It's going to hang from your belt loop, and a little bit kind of sloppy because it's a big loop and only in one direction. So if I want to carry the knife in a different way than like this, I'm going to need a different sheath, or I'm going to need to modify this one. Okay, there's that modify word again. So let's talk about handling and my other potential, well, possibly upsetting thoughts to some of you Hibben fans. All right, before we get to the handling, apologies. I realize sometimes when I'm editing a video I forgot to address something really important, and I have to do a little reshoot here. Thing I forgot to give you a close look at is the interesting design of the tang, which appears to be a full-length, full-size, full-thickness tang. Now, the original Loveless sub-hilt designs had a very distinctive tapered tang, but yeah, the Black Bear doesn't have a tapered tang. It's full thickness all the way down. So it's not necessarily a negative on this, and like I said, the feel and the balance is perfectly fine. But interesting things about the design of it, where it passes through the hilt and the sub-hilt. And if you can kind of see, let's see if I can get it in the light here. On the back quillon, there you go, it's interesting that the tang is part of that back quillon, kind of the middle of it. So when they shaped this knife, they left enough steel to basically fill out this. So basically at this point, it's not on the front. So I'm assuming what they did is, instead of creating a guard that has a slot through the middle of it and then they just slid it on like this, they created one that's more, shall we say, U-shaped, and slid it on from the front and pinned it in place. So yeah, part of the tang is filling out the middle of the rear quillon. Now on the sub-hilt, yeah, you can see that the tang goes straight through it. So again, kind of probably a U-shaped piece that they just slid on there and pinned in place. And it might have something to do with strength of construction or trying to slide things over the shape of this particular, that's a pretty wide pommel flare. Maybe that was just the best way to get everything together and make this design clean. But I thought that was interesting, the way they shaped the tang. Now, Is it really a solid tang? I have no idea. Is it sturdy? I guess we'll find out. So if anything starts to go wrong with this knife, I will definitely do an update. But yeah, I figured I'd give you a better look at that. All right, on to the handling. All right, so quick spoiler for the stuff I've kind of been working through in my project on, well, effectiveness of sub-hilt knives. Been playing with grip, been playing with techniques and just application and how they perform as compared to knives with more conventional handles. Some very interesting things about this knife. Now, kind of spoiler up front summary is I am a lot more impressed with this than I was worried I might not be. Does that make any sense? In other words, I liked it more than I thought I might like it when I took the risk on it. I certainly feel it's worth the 80 bucks I spent on it, maybe more than that. But there are a few things about it that, what are they? What's the good and the bad? Well, weight, balance, general feel in the hand is very good. Now, it depends on the grip. And some of this is very personal to me and what I like and how my weird hands are built. So your mileage may vary. But yeah, I already mentioned the bevels on the front are kind of annoying and sharp and uneven, and I feel like that might need to be adjusted, but I feel like for me that's an easy adjustment to make. However, this is where we get into the territory that might, well, upset some hardcore Gil Hibben fans, is I may make some modifications to his design. But yeah, that's a thing I do, and I may do it here. I may even out that little lump in the swedge that's annoying me. That's an easy fix and really isn't going to change the knife. I was thinking when I was looking at it I might make some changes to the blade, but now that I've got it in hand, I just, from here up, it's good. Simply that little bump, which is barely noticeable. Everything else from here up is great. The grip, compared to the cold steel, all the cold steel offerings, they have a really nice palm swell and then a flare at the pommel that fits the hand really well in conjunction with the sub-hilt design in a lot of different grips. This one's got that, but it's not nearly as pronounced. So there's a very slight swell, a very slight flare. I might make some changes to that. I don't know. It's kind of pretty the way it is. I don't want to necessarily risk messing up the finish on this, but I will probably make some changes to that front edge to round things off a little bit and just even them up so they feel a little bit better in my hand. So yeah, I'll probably make some changes to the grip shape. Now let's talk about the feel in the hand. I found that these knives feel fantastic across the board in the saber grip with the thumb on the back. Now for me with my injured hands, that's not the strongest position, but hey, I'll call it physical therapy. So working on that grip. Now there's not a big difference in shifting usually to the handshake, but when I shift to the handshake, yeah, it does move my fingers around and I do feel those weird edges a little bit more, just a little bit. Now what about a hammer grip? Well, the shape of the guard and other things, hammer grip on the cold steel knife, perfectly fine for those movements in terms of closer stabbing or those more sort of cleaver-like chopping actions, and I'll demonstrate those in future videos as compared to other kinds of cutting and slashing. When I do that, it shifts my fingers around enough, and this is an issue I have with a lot of weapons that have fixed finger grooves. If there's just one finger groove, like the top finger, it doesn't bother me. But if there are multiple finger grooves, my hands just never seem to fit any of those right. And they dig into the sides of my fingers kind of, and they just, okay. So in certain grips, this feels really positive, this second finger groove. But in other grips like the hammer grip, it shifts my hand around and now my fingers aren't in there right. And the knife handle feels just really, really wrong. And it may be because these corners are just not very well done. So I may start by just rounding those corners a little bit, evening everything up. I was worried, you know, and I still may wind up going this far that I may actually remove that mostly entirely. Well, we'll see. I'm not going to make that decision immediately. One thing this does that's interesting, point of balance, as I said right here, gives it a very even balance for cutting, slashing, thrusting. If I want more chop out of the knife, On this knife particularly, because of that secondary groove, I can actually grip it. I have just enough room down there to grip it down here and get more of a cleaver-like, hatchet-like feeling out of this knife. It's not the best, most secure feeling grip, especially not compared to this, but I could use it that way. Also, yeah, depending on how I decide to grip it, I can choke up on it and even get my finger up the way that guard is curved. It gives me enough room to get my thumb up on the back of the knife for close work. So I'll do some field testing with this knife as well. To be continued. All right, what about the reverse grip? This feels good. Again, that finger groove is just not in quite the right place for me. Now, can I choke down? That just doesn't fit and doesn't feel secure. So better in that grip. But I also get a little bit of this hook on the guard digging into the the heel of my hand just a little bit here, and I have to just make sure I avoid that in my reverse grip. And as I promised, I'll roll this knife into the videos I intend to do on the performance benefits of the sub-hilt. But I'm gonna be very thoughtful about making any changes to this knife. Hibben designs are kind of sacred for those people who love Hibben designs, but I feel like I just at least need to clean up a few things down here, and might need to rethink a carrying system. But otherwise, I'm pleased. I'm a lot more pleased than I thought I was gonna be with this. I think this knife has got a lot of potential. I think it's actually pretty darn good right out of the box as is, depending on what you like. Now, if you happen to have this knife or any other Hibben knives, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think of them, or any questions you might have about this, or any of the other things I might be doing with sub-hilts right now, and I can roll that into future videos. But until then, I hope this was useful, interesting, informative. And until I get to those, other videos, thanks for watching, following, subscribing, and I hope to see you back for, more of this and other things.